Cool. Thank you. All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. Another fun week. Always in the land of React, but hopefully, day by day, it gets better. Same thing for me. I could tell you horror stories. So if you happen to see, I posted an article today and just kind of getting things started. It was written by the gentleman who is responsible for the atomic design theory. He wrote books on it and is very well known and gives seminars and all sorts of great stuff. And it's an article about how he struggled with React and how the reasons why he thought he did and how he went through them. And it's really good. So I suggest even if you don't have that experience and React comes very intuitive to you, to read it anyway. I know for me, it was a little bit, well, a lot of a bit of a struggle. It was just completely different from how I ever thought about anything on the web. So I definitely understand that. And I just wanted to point that out because tonight I want to share some good resources to, in addition to going through and doing our traditional sort of walkthrough of things. So if you can't find that in general, I'll get this all posted when we take a break and you can have access to it very easily. So tonight, for the flow of events, what I plan to do, with just taking in everybody's feedback and stuff like that, is kind of bring both weeks together, but mostly focus on the fundamentals of React and some of the big sort of picture ideas of React, like state, props, and all the stuff that just is historically and well known to be confusing, and give you methods on how to handle setting them up, working your way through, getting things to render to the screen. And we're going to continue with the app that we were building last Tuesday. Now, if you weren't here last Tuesday, that's okay. You can not only look at the video, which we have, we do for Tuesday, Thursday, every session we do, but we're also going to take the time to just map out and whiteboard out quickly together what the app we did was. So then that way, even if you weren't here per se Tuesday, or I mean, I barely remember yesterday. So I mean, if your memory begets you at the moment like mine often does, you don't have to worry. We're going to take a little bit to go through and talk about how you can handle when you're in your career, somebody giving you a template, somebody giving you unfinished work. Often you will jump into jobs where you might, somebody gets promoted and now you're responsible for maintaining their code base and going through and troubleshooting and debugging, and we'll use that as a jump into the next phase. So not only will we get that review, we'll then talk about how we're going to plan out the next portion of the app. We'll fix an issue that occurred in it currently where we're standing, and then we're going to build from scratch a portfolio piece for it. So we'll get to practice all those good React skills again, and then towards the end of the session, in the last hour and beyond, we'll start to pull in a little bit of router and what we did with that in order to get some pagination going and align with what we're doing there as well. So lots of practice, and I can't stress that enough. React is something you don't just read the chapter and that's it. I've constantly and continue to reread the same chapter, and each time I learn something a little bit different. So that's okay. You just keep at it, and being here, that's a sign of that. So let's get ready to rock and roll. Anybody have any questions before we begin? Now, I will ask you during the session just to mute your mics and just be aware of that. If you do have questions at any time, I will take periodic breaks to kind of catch up. However, Adam is here and will be watching the chat and can let me know of anything important. I tend to get very focused and sometimes will not pay attention to the chat. So Adam is very good at helping me with that. He'll let me know. And you can always unmute too appropriately. And I'll gladly entertain any questions at any time, okay? So let's take a look at what I have so far, and I'll whiteboard it out, and then we'll take a look at the application. We'll introduce the bug after we look at the code, and then we'll jump into fixing it and then mapping out our new application from the ground up, okay? A couple tips I'm gonna give too along the way is basically we wanna make sure we get things to render quick. One thing was hard for React is sometimes it would take me hours to get something to even appear on the screen. So I'm gonna show you how I did before, how to help with that, and how to debug methodically. So let's roll. And look at that nice Lambda paper. Again, whoever, I gotta find his name. Somebody had made that, and I just love that. So whoever made that, if you're here, thank you very much for that. So let us map out kind of what I had as an overview for this app, okay, just to remind us essentially. So the idea is that I had basically well, we'll start with the top level. I had my main component that was holding pretty much everything to begin with, which is the app. And hey, let me give you a little strategy here. And my pen, hey, I'm working on it. I'm learning with this Wacom board, but it's okay to start to build your application in one spot. Often everybody, and this was very stressful for me, you get so stressed because you get a file structure and you have to match it. And that's important, and you can, but as you start it, if you start off in the app, and as you start to see, let's say, a comment section come to life or a post container come to life, then you could refactor it out. And the way React should work is that each component is essentially by itself an app, its own app. So if we can get to a point where we can close that functionality, it shouldn't matter if we were to refactor it out and move it around. So often I like to think about it that way because it's a lot easier to see a table body or a header or a comment form than it is to try and fit to it from the beginning. So you'll see me take that approach a lot of the times too, using that idea of like, as the components come alive, break them out. So we're gonna start off in the app, and basically you're gonna see that there's two major components that end up becoming to life here. And essentially what they turn out to be is twofold. So I'm going to have essentially a table, and this is going to be a table of two things, basically names and job titles. And I'm also going to have another major breakdown where I have a form. So as I whiteboard this out, I'm going to show you kind of what they look like in the app. So the application looks like this to start. Okay, so I have a table and I have a form. Notice how at this point you could kind of see, oh, okay, that's split, right? And let me do this side by side quick, just to drive the point home with this. And my 14 desktops. All right, now come on. All right, so let's just get this side by side and do a comparison here and get all this junk out of the way so you can see. All right, so now in this case, notice my two major divisions. If I were to, they say thinking in React, taking this sort of picture and breaking it down by drawing little rectangles over it, you could kind of see my two major components, we'll call them for now. This sort of form, or table, excuse me, and this form input section, right? So as you start to map these out, I want you to think like this. When you're whiteboarding, and you're getting this game plan for your application. Think ahead and say, okay, so what kind of data am I going to need to collect in both these locations? And this is going to help you kind of centralize where you're going to put your state to begin with. And a lot of the times you happen to just go right on the app, because this is where you hold all your components that come together to form this application. However, you may have some wiggle room. For instance, in the Instagram one, if I were to say, let's say that this table here was static. It's not, but for the sake of just an example, let's say I needed no data here. Then I could probably put state on my form. If I had, and we're going to look at the rest of the breakdown, if only this side of the branch needed data, like maybe one was a search bar that was static on every page and the other one is a whole bunch of data, then you want to localize your state at that top post component that's going to provide all the data down. Because in React, we could really only go one way easily, and that's to drill down. So set yourself up for success right from the beginning. And think about kind of when you're looking at applications or creating them, what data do I need? And where is that data going to live? Because in order for components to share it at this point in the game, it has to be the highest point up there. We will see there's going to be times when, for instance, you got to collect data on a lower level part of the DOM. And that gets a little bit tricky passing it up, but we can do it. Okay, and we'll look at that tonight. So a little bit of a breakdown. Then what I did, and this is where you could have some liberty because some people will break things down differently. For me, I try to think about like what component, like what are my most basic features of my UI? Like in this case, I'm going to have a name input, a job input. I'm going to have a table where I'm going to have a table header and a body. So the way I broke this down is on my forms, you'll see I did 2 inputs. And you could put these together and break them out, but I separated these out just to do some additional practice and also just make it easier to kind of move them around later. And I have one for the name, and then you're going to see one for the job. I did this too to be, sometimes it's very difficult to deal with, I think, multiple form inputs. You can handle it, but for the sake of this application, I decided to separate them. And then finally on my table, you're going to see we have a T header, which is static, or a T head as we call it, the head of the table. And we're going to have a component that's going to be a T body, which is going to be our data when we render it out. So that's kind of where we're at, okay, in terms of the structure of the app. Now, as I start to look at this, and I think, okay, not so bad, right? I'm only doing 2 passes here and 3 here, but you know what? When things start to run together and you have name and name input and an app and comment bodies and everything starts to look the same after you get frustrated, I think we'll reconsider about how difficult it is to pass things even 1 level, let alone 3, when you're trying to keep track of all of that. So with our plan, I'm going to essentially have you think about making it easy on yourself for that reason. So we're going to make sure we pick names that are really good and descriptive as best as we can, and we're going to check every step of the way. For instance, let's take a look at some code, okay? And what I mean by that is, as I go through these applications, I don't care if I even think I'm right, okay? I'm going to check myself and do what's called a sanity test every step of the way. So even if I know what that's going to log to the console, I'm going to log it anyway. And my rationale is this. the more you do that now, the more you're able to pinpoint these errors later. So for instance, the biggest, and I used to do this and I still sometimes do, is you get an error and your first indication is to not look at the log. You start changing things. And if you're like me, you get to a point where you don't remember what you changed. And now things are seriously broken all over the place, right? And often it's something like a misspelling, a hyphen, something like that. And as humans, we tend to think the worst, mostly when it comes to code. And we tend to overlook that. And that could, you know, sometimes I'd be like, one time it was 5 hours because I had put an extra hyphen in something. And I could have sworn it was something in my logic and it was me, and I just didn't understand what was going on. And that sort of negative thinking is propagating, and you want to, and easier said than done, but the more we check and go through and we make sure that what goes into a component is what we want, what comes out of it is what we want, we localize problems. So if I get to a point where here, we're going to do this right now, I'm going to click the edit button because things look good, right? I mean, before I even do that, let me reload it and let's test the functionality. So I should be able to add, I'll just do something. Okay, so I can add, right? That's good. So whoever worked on this app before did good there. Ooh, that looked cool. What did they do there? It looks like when I went to go try and press enter, it yelled at me to fill out both fields. So hey, so far so good, right? So maybe it's going to be an easy job for us today. And I should be able to delete. Oh, okay, all right. Oh, okay, that's good. So far so good. And we'll review all this in too in a different form of the app tonight. But let's see, last thing is edit. If this works, we can go home. We're good for the day. So first of all, the UI might be a little misleading because I already forgot which one I clicked. So I might want to come up with a way to indicate that later. So that's a little bit of a bummer. Not a deal breaker, and we could handle that after the functionality, but something to think of. And let's just put in a name and a job. Maybe be a little bit more clear about names and jobs later, but for now, put in, what do I do? Stuff. And, oh, well, that didn't work. Let's try it again. All right, so clearly we have a bug here, right? So this is a perfect opportunity to talk about how to debug in React. We have an expectation for a functionality, which is editing. We are not seeing that functionality, and we're able to reproduce it. Also, so if you want to follow along, I did post the link for this repo in the After Hours channel. Please remind me as we go to push. I mean, I talk about committing and how important that is all the time, but I mean, practice what you like. I get into it. So if I don't push, let me know and just remind me. But you should be where I'm at the moment, okay? So before we handle the location of the bug, does anybody have any questions so far about the thinking in React? Okay, we've been talking about it a lot, but it never hurts to stress it again. Okay, if not, we'll proceed. So what should I do? The first thing is if this was new to me, I'd want to, let's check out the structure. So opening up, you kind of see what's going on. And considering the, okay. Considering the file structure, looks okay, decent. You're always going to see an index and an app. So those are two things, you know, there's a lot of ways to do things in React, which makes it very complicated, I think, because I search for one way. I think that'd be easy, but there isn't. There's themes that you'll see, but One thing you definitely always will see is people's use of the index in the app. And basically the index is your hook in. This is what hooks you in. This is what renders the whole thing. And if you were to look, trying to make that connection to HTML, it essentially, our app isn't even made yet. So this is doing all that work you did back in the UI when you had that big object and you had each piece of it lay out on the DOM. And this is doing it essentially under the hood. So a lot of the stuff that it may not seem like it is, but a lot of the stuff from functions and objects, that's what these things are, just with a different way to write them. They're components, but they're really just like classes were these sort of functions, but prettied up with some good notation. These are all just functions. And I want you to think about that, because when we get to our app, which is the first main container, think about how these things kind of work. They take in props, right? And props are kind of these variables that come in. You can't change them. You could add to them, but they're not mutable. And they come in from the outside. And this class or component or function does stuff with it. It has its own data, which is in scope, called state. It does some stuff and it returns something. And in this case, it just happens to return a piece of HTML that marks up the DOM. That sounds a lot like a function. And that's the connection here. So it's just, I think the biggest hiccup for me in React was the fact that I couldn't connect it to what we were doing before, but I also wasn't seeing the obvious right there, because it looks weird. You don't expect it. So that's kind of one of the big things, because I know a lot of you have talked to me and have said, made comments on feedback we were looking for about props and state and the switching between them and what are they. And really, when you boil down to it, props, those attributes, are what come in from outside with the attribute, the tag, class name, ID, character, whatever you want, name. You can do whatever you want there. And the state is the inside, essentially, the data that you want to hold and protect and make available if you choose to out of scope. And sometimes you do that. And in React, we do it by passing it through props. So props is like this sort of big line of data that these components share, and they allow to connect their states together so they can function together. And that's how you get a bigger app. So with that in mind, a little philosophy, a little touching moment there with React, we want to now locate our bug. So going through, I'm hoping that since all the other functionality was there and were rendered, right, that I'm probably going to look for something that has to deal with an edit. Okay, so first things first, without an error, right, because this here loads right up on the terminal. We'll check our dev, no errors. So what the heck, right? This is one of the worst things, because now it's a logic issue that isn't going to show in the log. In fact, when you get errors, like, embrace them. They are nothing against you. It's just the computer doesn't, it's the computer. It doesn't know what you're telling it. It can't understand. It's not you that can't understand, it's the computer. So we have to speak in a language it can. And let me tell you, sometimes JavaScript is a language I might need to do a little Rosetta Stone with on the weekend, because it's tough, right? Like any language. So what do you do to learn it? You immerse yourself. That's the best way. And you practice and you keep practicing. So now we're just in an issue that we have to work out our logic, the worst type of bug, but we can fix it. So given all that, since these components should be separate and functioning on their own, let's find this edit thing. So hopefully the person named things well. All right, so it looks like it looks like somebody got a job at Google and just left, right? We don't even have a complete function here. So that might be a good place to start, right? It looks like we have a toggle edit going down. This toggle edit is apparently taking a property called isEditing and flipping it. So if it were to be false to begin with, when this function fires, it's going to say to the computer, hey, whatever I put in this input, it's editing and not adding. So that's a start. And the only issue now is we don't have a handle edit. So we know how to tell the computer it's editing. Okay, let's see one other big piece, right? Because not only, what did I do to edit? I click the button. So that's going to be like my toggle and toggle edit. And then I'm going to have to handle my edit down here and submit it somewhere too, right? So I'm going to look and see what's going on with this, because it looks like when I go to submit it, no matter if I add it or edit it, let me try that again, it adds. So if I go to try and edit it, it just adds it. So there must be something going on in my handle submit that isn't differentiating between the two. Okay, so notice the line of thinking. Isolate, and most of the times your isolation, and we'll run into them tonight, is going to be what line number, where is it, what file, and you'll get that in the error log. However, if you don't get an error message, you have two things. One, it could be a syntactical thing, but usually they throw errors, and those are the weird ones where you know something's defined, but it's like a spelling issue. And the second one is logic. And this one is because of incomplete logic that I didn't finish. So, I mean, rarely you'll probably even run into this, but it mimics the way to think about these in a localized way. How do you solve a problem? What do you do with fires and natural disasters? What do you do with injuries? You minimize them. You minimize and localize so that they don't spread. And then that way they're handleable. You can handle them easier. So you handle them early and you minimize them so that you can handle them efficiently and within your control. So it looks like we're going to have to write some logic here, and we're probably going to have to tie it into here. So the next thing is, all right, that's up on the app. Where's this coming into play? So let's take a look. We're going to drill down and take a look at all the connections. So basically what we have going on here is our inputs, and let me do this. Oops. Oh, that was not going for the integral symbol there. There we go. And let me do also this. And let's pull up my application. And let's see, I have a job input, a name input, and my form. So these are all my 4 parts of that chain, right? Going down, breaking the form into the 2 inputs in my app. And let's put that over here and just move it a little bit this way, okay? And we'll close up that. And just to put this in some sort of order that kind of mimics going from top down, we'll do the 2 inputs down here, and we'll put the form up here. And essentially what happens then is once I have these organized correctly, app is passing to form, and then form is passing to these 2. Okay, so in this order, we're essentially looking at in terms of the component tree. So let's first check that everything, and now if I was writing this from scratch, which you'll see when we build up the portfolio part, I would start up in the top, and I'm going to go through exactly what I would do here. So the methods that are being involved, and you know what? We can do a little close up of this too. Close it up and we'll open what we need, right? So that we could get a sense of that. We could even probably bring these down a little bit for now. So taking a look at my methods that I need, I definitely am curious to make sure that my method for toggling edits, handling the edits, and the handling of the submits are going to be most likely the ones I'm going to need. But let's take a look. And anything we need on state, that's going to be an issue too. So it looks like we have the name and the job, which these inputs are going to collect. So let's make sure that we drill down first, okay? Because the idea is, and we could look at the submission of the non-editing ones to kind of give us a clue, is we have these two low-level components that are now collecting info, right? So here's my form input. It gets data. And now I need to update state, right? So, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'll just put state down here. Crap. And then you realize that, well, that's not going to work, because how am I going to trigger a method and update state and get a value into state when the state is all the way up here to begin with? And now my methods are defined up here. I'm reusing the functionality from the submission that I did. And now they're separate. And bringing down a whole nother state is going to not work, because just by doing that, it's not going to connect. And I want these to kind of be in sync, right? I want these to update, and I want to keep all my data in one location and have one source of truth, because the more data states I add, although there are times where that could apply, but for the most part, you want to try and keep one set of truth to keep things orderly. Because I bet as you started doing this, I used to put state all over the place, and it gets really, really confusing really quickly. But with what I'm about to show you, you could kind of give yourself a pattern. So the form values down here, I'm collecting, right? So this onChange method means when I type in here that every little change I make is going to end up essentially on state. Well, if I open this form up, looking at the job input, right? So I'm going to look and see the values here, and I'm going to want to make sure that I'm collecting it here. Ooh, wait, oh, maybe because I'm hitting the Alt key, right? So, cool. So I'm definitely on name input, collecting it on props. And the best part about it is, if you go up on the app, it's also being collected on state at the same time. So this may seem a little bit of like, whoa, how's that done? But this is the goal that you want to do without Redux. You'll get to that later on, and it's great, but without it, you need to consider what's called lifting up state, right? And React gives a good procedure for this. And the idea is this. You can drill down your method, and you can drill down your data, right? So if I want to, let's say, sync up the value of this input with my state, I can have an entry for state. And if I were to drill that down first, I can drill that down to the next, and this is what makes this part annoying, because you have to go through every link of the chain. But I can drill that down through my table in the form of name. And why I don't have this .state is I'm doing something called destructuring, where I essentially allows you with objects and arrays to list out the properties and access them really easily. So what this says is that characters, name, job, and ID are all really just this.state.characters, this.state.name. But if I define it like this, it allows me to just use the name property. So it cuts off the this.state, because I'm telling the computer essentially, oh, hey, all of these variables here are related to this state when I do that step. So that's just called destructuring. So now when it gets really hectic, I don't have to write this.state a million times. So I could use my characters, my ID, what have you. So I'm linking up my name, and when that name changes on state, it's going to cause this to re-render, which is going to get passed as props. And here's the connection, right? Because you're saying, well, state and props, they seem separate. But when we map them this way, you can now trigger a re-render down the whole thing and say, oh, okay, state updated, great. Re-update this, props gets repassed, oh, new prop, re-update this. And in this case, it's passing it through to the name input and says, oh, hey, guess what? Re-update this. And that's the connection to state. So it's not like the state is on the object here itself at the moment. It's up here, but through the prop chain, we're essentially saying, okay, here we go. New information, carry it here. Re-render, carry it here. Update yourself. And now we have a new value for that. So the first thing you want to do with stuff like this is when you move state up and you have state up on the highest parent, you want to first drill down if it's a value, that value. And B, if it's called name, don't change it to foo in the middle or banana or whatever. Keep it name and keep the name, like if it's this.state.name, then keep it props.name. It just makes it easier in the long run. This is not the time to be literary. Be concise and readable. And help do it for you. I mean, to start with, it's for everyone else too. But I mean, ideally first for you, so that you can follow that and track that. Because I did some weird stuff with names. I don't know why I would ever switch them. Just make it easy for yourself. So then once you pass that, it would be great because for forms are the worst because not only do we have to pass a method to collect the value and shuttle that back up, but we also have to pass the value down itself. So it's not like a submission where you're just passing a function. Do I have a question? Anybody, is that a question? In fact, this is a good time to pause for them actually. Any thoughts or questions at this moment? Okay.
No, sorry, that noise you heard was probably me just entering. I got here really late, but
oh no, that's fine. I'm actually glad it happened because I often need to be reminded to take a second. So no, that was no worries at all.
I actually have a comment.
Yeah, go, of course.
I wonder if it would be feasible or easier or even better if you hit the edit button and instead of it switching the form so it updates the edit, where if you hit the edit button, it just inputs, it replaces the the text fields with input fields. And so you can
we can do that, right? So we want to, because here's the thing. I want functionality first. So
right.
Let's talk about this. Is that going to influence our functionality? You want to do two separate inputs and for edits only? Because this is a good question because
yeah. So instead of that submit form at the bottom will just be to add, and then whenever you hit the edit button in the name and the job, so let's say Charlie Janitor, it'll be instead two input fields, and then maybe the edit button will we'd probably have to have another button that says submit edit or something, and then
we can. In fact, I always used to do that, and I'm gonna tell you right now. When to start, you can do that, but then my point becomes, why have React? I already have inputs that I can use as components. So why do double the work? And that, let me tell you something. You bring up an excellent point because I'm just starting to get onto that, right? So no, but listen, this is really important because we can do it. Will it solve the problem? Absolutely. Is it a viable way? Hey, listen, you know my motto. If it works, if it doesn't hit performance, and if it is approved by your boss and your boss is okay with it, it's fine. There's no other factors that can say your code's better than mine or hers is better than his if they all do those accomplishments. Yes, you can always refactor. Yes, you can always be more concise. Yes, you can always make it better. But in the moment, what you bring up is not a bad idea. However, as things get more complex, the idea is, and it's so hard to see here because as the apps get bigger, it's better, is the components should be things like buttons, inputs. And as you're learning about conditional rendering and rendering props, we should use that component over and over and just pass it a different set of parameters to make it what we want. And that's what we're going to do here. I like your idea.
Yeah.
Maybe we should make the submit button turn into edit when we toggle it.
Yeah, that would,
Toggle.
for a UX perspective or user interface.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's get this functionality, and then we'll do that. Maybe when we hit the edit button, we pull in the that name into focus. We put a focus attribute on. You're thinking exactly how you should be. So that's a good point to bring up. And something that I would do too is I would get lost because I'd start to do that. And once you nail the functionality, then of course, UI and functionality go hand in. You can't neglect one or the other, because you could have a great functioning app, but nobody could know what the hell to do with that. I mean, and so I definitely think these are points that we need to talk about, because these are the things that when you're sitting doing the project by yourself, that are like things you find out over time. And for me, it was important. Understanding that whole process was important to me. And I definitely agree. So as we wrap this up, because I'll move through this now and then we'll talk about where we're going to go with router and some stuff, I want you to think about UI that you would add to this. In fact, if you're comfortable with it, let's do this. Let's practice some GitHub. Go on my repo, and you're going to submit what's called an issue. And you do this in open source all the time. So when you're doing open source and you go on and you look for first issues and you want to help out and maybe help Prettier with their package, or go on React, there's issues all over them. Tell me what you want in a feature. Go on and submit an issue. Not only will you get heat map credit for it, but it's great practice as to how issues, which are something we don't often get the chance to use until we're right on the job, work. So go ahead, submit an issue. You don't like the edit button because it's no casual, or what do they call that, the affordance, or it's not intuitive. I can't tell if I'm editing or submitting. That's perfectly viable. Submit an issue, and we'll take a look at those too. That's just as important as the functionality. Okay? Does that make sense? And honestly, you don't have to follow. All you have to do, I could show you really quickly, because let me make sure I have them on. I think they default off, so I'll be here. Okay, that's not my repo, so hold on. Get out of here, Google. But let me just show you where you could submit an issue on that. So this is called React something. Oh, good, thanks for fuzzy search. So React demo. And okay, so you can go right here to issues, and you could come in and just hit new issue. And you can tell me essentially anything you want. So we'll fill out one for the one we had. Editing to do, or not to do, editing name job is ambiguous, misleading, whatever you want to call it. And normally you would have people have templates you could follow to fill out here for various bug reports and issue reports. The goal on these is you want to reproduce the issue and essentially give kind of like what led to it, if it's a bug, or if it's a feature request, describe what you'd like to see as that feature. If it's a documentation, like literature you'd want to see on the app. And for now, we're just going to keep it simple. And I'm going to just say basically a user story and say when a user edits an entry, it should be clearly visible which item is being edited and whether I am editing or submitting a new entry. So we'll keep that for now. we'll submit the new issue, and there we go. I get it, and we work on it, and we close it, and we do exactly what we do on your pull requests. It's very similar to a pull request, but pull requests, issues lead the pull requests. So for instance, when we go out and we look at React, and sorry about this segue here, but I think this is just as important because GitHub is a huge part of the job, and it's wonderful. It's incredible what you can do with it, and learning how to do it. It was something that it's still taking me time because I feel like it's not intuitive, and you don't really. You need to be on the job to use it and see how it rolls out. So absolutely, but let me go back and we'll just pick on React. You think you have issues, right? I mean, look, guess we're not perfect no matter how far you get. Bugs always occur, and it's not anything to do with you as an intelligent human. They happen. So if not, then we wouldn't have issues. So you take a look and you want to learn, go on here. Start contributing to open source. Jump in. Granted, there's things like I have memory leak. Yeah, I don't know. No, okay. And like you come up here, and there are sometimes ones that are very. They will look for first time, good first issues. So you can kind of look through, and you know what? If you find one every so often and want to do it just to practice, not only will you practice, but you'll make a developer somewhere in the world very happy, and you'll contribute to what I think is something that has accelerated the development of code since its inception, really. So, but yeah, that's all I want you to do. So thank you for bringing that up. You really sparked. I wanted to mention about submitting issues, but I didn't know when the time would be right for that. So thank you for indicating, because that was the right time. So cool. Very, very nice. At this point, let's just take a minute break. If you want to take a look over stuff and submit some issues, then we'll fix our edit button, and then we can look at specific concerns on what you guys have. So if we want to look at some router stuff and how we could maybe build a job portfolio when we click on each one of those things, we could look at some debugging, but let's just take a minute and decompress. All right, the silence is I'm joking, but I need a clock because I cannot sense how long a minute goes. So I'll tell awkward jokes until we elapse. All right, so submit some issues. Let's get it going. Let's build this app up. We can definitely get some cred for it and practice some GitHub. So how can we go wrong? All right, that feels like a minute. So let's go ahead and connect these up and see if we can get that going. And then we'll talk about where we want to go from here. So the text is collecting fine. That's fine. We need to think about when we edit this we just want to edit it and add it before we get to the UI of the button switching, which is going to be the last phase of this. We want to make sure we're collecting our text, and then what do we do with it? So it looks like everything down here is fine for now. We're getting a value, and when we hit the submit button, it's all getting handled by handle submit, right? So how can we perhaps change this so that we maybe funnel through this data to handle edit? They're both in the same location, right? So if I were to be able to tell or pair that, hey, I'm editing, and maybe use that information to select for handle edit versus handle submit, I don't have to worry about making more inputs. because it's not the inputs that's deciding what data I'm collecting. I type in that box and it doesn't know if I'm editing or submitting. It knows I'm changing, but luckily changing it's universal for both of those things. So we need to think about this from the function of the handling the submissions and the edits, because that's what determines whether it's going to get pushed, which we're going to have to write the logic, whether it's going to get edited in or whether it's going to just get added on the end. So let's take a look at toggle edit and what it's paired up with, because this is going to be the big thing. Notice that what I'm doing here is when you have state that relies on the previous state value, that's the perfect opportunity to pass in the prev state and not use the shortened version of set state. That's the best time to use the callback here. And when you do, you get access to a prev state, which is the previous state. And could I set this to true? Yes. But in an effort to make this more dynamic, what I'm doing is I'm taking whatever the state is, which starts off as false. That's fine. I have to code that in. And I'm saying, when I toggle it, make it the opposite. So instead of running into a bug later, and it's easier just to programmatically handle this and say, you know what? If you get true, toggle means flip it to false. Make it not true. If you get false or true, make it not true. And if you get false, make it not false. Make it the opposite. So that handles that more dynamically. So what moment do we want this to toggle is my question. What piece of UI, because this is going to establish everything we do from here. Because it's going to, when I toggle, maybe I change the text on the submit button to edit. Or maybe I may update, or maybe I hide something, the submit button, and make a new button. So this is going to be contingent on a lot for this. So toggling it might go where? What is the moment where I say I'm clearly editing? When I click this edit button, right? So now the question is, where is it? Odds are, if it's in a list like this, I probably mapped it out somewhere so that every piece of this UI got that button. So let's take a look. That means that we're going to have to do a little switcheroo here probably. And I'm going to have to open a new window. And how is it going to do that? Come on. Why does it always does weird things like that. Yes, I know I have the same window open. Aha, I'm going to trick you. Open client. Okay, so with that in mind, is this even the right one? This is, whoops, wrong demo. So many after hours demo. Talk about naming, right? Like, look at my file structure. AH-demo1, AH-demo2, to-do1, to-do2. So, see, even I forget sometimes, and that's okay. So let's get the right. All right, so we'll try this again. And if that doesn't work, remember this, we'll come back to it. Okay, so I'm going to open up some other things here. So we're going to take a look at the table body, essentially, for now. And for now, this is going to be the only thing I want to look at, because the rest of it we'll handle if we have to pass down. But I'll take my table body and I'll take my table just for now. So I'll replace those this way. So now we have data that's kind of like intersecting here in a way. And it's doing it through not direct lineages, but sort of this prop kind of party going on. So let's take a look here what I'm doing. Here's my mapping, and I'm mapping out on my button. Oh, hey, toggle edit, right? So I have this being passed down as, ooh, look at this here. So here's another way to do this. Just to kind of for now, so it's not, remember what I have here. So this is, technically you write props, but if you have props dot this, props dot that, you can do what I did on the first app and set it equal separately, or you could also destructure right here. So what I'm doing when I do this is I'm saying, hey, props normally was here, but take the place of props, and I want you to take out these pieces of props. So it was, through the power of erasure here, characters, handle, delete, and toggle edit. So that way, I'm able to just use those methods without doing props dot. Okay, so that's the use of that. Second thing I like to point out here, this was always confusing for me. If you are mapping over something, this variable is the singular form of what this collection is. So if I have a collection or array of characters, when I map over each for each, or I map over a character at a time. So anything that's in a map, when you want to reference it, it's not props anymore, it's this. So for instance, when I get an array of characters, each character has a name and a job. And since I'm in my map function and I'm declaring the variable for each item here, you have to use that in the map. So just watch out for that, because the common thing, and I've done it too, is you get so props heavy, it's kind of automatic to say, oh, props, and then you're going to get undefined. Or you're going to get a no reference error, a number of different myriad of things, usually not defined or something like that. Why? Yeah, we don't have to get into that, but think about that. What might be true about functions and props out here and props in here, and think about how that may influence it. And a lot of the times you're not passing it to that in my case. But anyway, continuing on. The toggle edit looks good, right? So, let's try something here, okay? I'm going to show you how you can kind of use your dev tools to not do that, but to your advantage here. So I'm going to open this up, and in the future, watch this part of the video because if I go too fast in the sake of time, but I want you to set this up. You're going to go and download an extension called Chrome Debugger and Chrome DevTools. And this is going to pull in, for now we'll start with the debugger. And this is going to pull in the ability to do what you do in the sources tab right in VSC. So we're going to talk about breakpoints, and we're going to get it beyond console.log tonight. And this, you're supposed to come in and search and look for stuff, and it's great. And you can do it here too, but I just want to show you, just because I like to keep it all together, how you could do that. So once you download this, it's really easy to set up. You just come in, and to set it up, let me get back on my component that I was on. What was that? Table body. What I do is you go through and come to the little buggy, click it, and click the wheel up here. And you're going to get two choices. You're going to pick Chrome and give it a second, and it's going to pop up a launch.json file. You're going to change two things. You're going to come in. We're on port 3000 by default. And you're going to, you don't have to do this, but I think this just makes it easier just for black boxing of scripts and stuff. You're going to throw an SRC. So this basically means your top level directory of your project, and then we're in the SRC. Now, I should be careful here. Let me double check that. Technically, if I close this up, I'm in the client folder in my SRC. So if you found that to be buggy, you just want to make sure for React. Usually, if you don't have it buried in another folder like I do, you could just put SRC. If it worst comes to worst, you could leave it workspace. But most of us use client folders, especially in a lot of the projects, especially coming into backend too. When you use React, you make a client folder with it. You can just use that to kind of set your web root. You hit save, and for the most part, once we do that, we should be good to go. Now we're going to test that it connects. You can hit F5, or back on the buggy here, you can hit play. I'm going to hit F5. It's going to pop up a window, which is your app, and then say hello to the console. This is right here. Let me get this thing out of the way. not that far out of the way. This is this. So when I pull this up, you now have this console in here. And I should pull up the one that it spawned. Here we go, 20 tabs. It's probably under this somewhere. Either way, it's the same thing. Okay, to prove it, we'll go in, and what do we know? What do we do in the console? We need to log the window. There it is. So here's my console. Oh, the window object. Okay, so basically, now you have the console. But we could take it even one step further, and I can show you how to get the entire set of dev tools in there. But for now, that's not needed. The only thing that is not yet I have found to pull in, although it might actually work in the DevTool extension, is the React tools, which people say a lot of things and hate on them at times. I get it, but they're actually really good for structure and making sure that, you know, for state props and just it's great for the tree. So I definitely, I bounce back for that. But now for this kind of stuff, here we are. We got our debugger set up, and we can do some things like this. Like, first of all, let's just check what toggle edit logs as. Just to see, it's probably not going to be helpful, but let's give that a save. And okay, ooh, that doesn't look good. So that looks undefined. Let me label it just so I can keep track of it. And toggle, undefined. Oh, okay, that's going to be a problem, right? So toggle edit appears to not be defined. Well, that stinks. So that's one way to check. Here's another way. The way this works for breakpoints, and this is really powerful, and this took me a while to wrap my head around, because I would go in here and try it, and I'd be screwing things up, and these scripts would be popping up with all stuff, and you have to understand what this does, and you're going to get a really beauty of this piece. When I set this little red dot, this little red dot says, if you reach me, stop. So your JavaScript file is going to run, and it's going to run top down, essentially. And what happens is when it executes and it gets to a breakpoint successfully, it stops. If you don't get to that breakpoint, and it took me a while to think about this, your script is breaking somewhere else. So if you have an error that breaks the script and it never reaches that breakpoint, you're never going to trigger it. So we have an issue here. One might suggest what to kind of narrow this issue down. Let's set some breakpoints and see where they don't trigger. And we could kind of intuitively narrow down where we might be breaking, if we're breaking at all. Okay, so let's just see. I'm gonna set one on the return. That's a great place to set one of these to start. Do a refresh. Oh, we broke. All right, as soon as you start to see this, something happened. I don't know where tools came from. Oh wait, that's part of that up there. Never mind. Like tools, but it's toggle. But so far, when we see this turn into the plus, we got something going on. I don't know what, but it looks like now it's trying to call a function. Down here, the beauty of these things is that now you can see, and some of it's not going to, it's going to be a lot of under the hood stuff, but when you look at all the stuff that goes on. This is why we don't write DOM, and it's so hard, because look what it's doing for you. It's going through, it's looping, it's setting all these different parameters, it's trying to render itself, and then finally there's your app render. So it's really incredible to see. It looks like we got some table body stuff going on. Oh, so I click on that function, and when I do, you get this information that is really, really, console.logging is great. And there are some people that say, oh, we're beyond it. No, we're not. It can be misleading. It can be difficult to do in JSX because of the placement of it, and it depends on where your returns are. But it's a great way to check in and out. Now you know how to go in between. Here we could see what's going on in this moment. when I hit this line, what everything is defined as. Ooh, we have there's something I did something wrong here, right? Because it looks like, and we could hover over these two. So my characters list doesn't look like there's really anything there, but that's odd because they thought they were on the screen. I got this handle delete function coming in. That looks like it's passing okay. And this toggle edit is undefined. All right, so the first thing I might do is I might, and I love this phrase, comment it out until it works, or backtrack until it works. Let's just go back, and maybe I'm just trying to be too fancy here with my fancy destructuring in ES6, and I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's change that to props, and let's change everything back to props, just to go recenter ourselves. Maybe I did something wrong. Let me do a refresh on that, and let me check that stack. And all right, so hover over props. And if you ever get like a point where it won't hover, once you hit that line, you should be able to, oh, it's not defined. So we might need to, let's try and step it up a little bit. And when you want to step down a little bit and go to your next line of code, you could step over it or into functions. And you could continue to execute the script from where you left off. If you start to do this and you realize it's not defined, then now we're running through a part of the script where we didn't get there yet. So what I usually do at this point is I just kind of step for curiosity. I kind of want to see what it goes through till it gets back to something I do. And we're going to be clicking a while because it does a whole heck of a lot. So usually, oh, we're looping. Look at that. We're stuck. I don't know what we're doing there. So usually when it gets to that point, my curiosity wanes and I just hit play again. And I stop the execution, okay? And we get an error. So I close out the vendor scripts. I take off this breakpoint and I say, oh, okay. Put the props back on. We'll resave it. Looks like we're back to some form of normalcy. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we got going on. So this time I'm going to set, we know that we're good up to here, right? So let's drop some, and sometimes you can't drop returns certain places. So I just kind of like, when in doubt, like I just click and see if it'll let me. I mean, there are key places where you can. Returns are always great places to break. Usually event listeners are. So that, I don't know why that's being difficult, but there usually is a way, I don't know if you could do it in here, to break on the event. And that usually is helpful as well. In fact, I'm going to set that in here to show you that you could bounce back and forth between the two. In fact, you can pick one or the other, but whatever works for you, you get a style. And there are times, though, that I will admit this extension is limited. But for basic stepping, it's good. But here, just because of this odd issue that popped up, I'm going to look up table body, take a peek here. Ooh, got some harmony, oh God, all sorts of goodness going on here. I might not maybe entertain that, but what I will try and find is this down here. And I'm just going to have this generally break whenever I have a mouse event go off. And normally I would just set it for a click. And let's do a refresh. All right, let's give it a click. Boom. Okay, so now if I come back in, I'm broke. Now I broke at that breakpoint. So this is in sync with what's going on in the browser. So let's just step through it and see where it gets. All right, again, wherever we're doing right here, it's going through a very epic part of this script to send out this on click. So it's taking care of like all of that. So this is a time then after I've used it to step through and I kind of have this issue localized where I say, okay, let's stop it and let's go back to the log. I'll clear my breakpoints and I'm going to analyze now from the top level down what's going on, why this toggle edit is not defined. So up on my application, I'll start. And let's split that. And let's get rid of this. And let's see. So we definitely are looking here. And is there anything in between the table? Oh, wait a minute. Did I? Oh, I did pass it. Okay. So the question is if you see what's going on, put it on an issue. I go through this because it's the method that helps the people that struggle see how you can do this when you're stuck. So if you see stuff, throw it on issue. I definitely would love to see it, but this process is what's important. Do I have a question though in the meantime?
I was just gonna say that when you were on app, it doesn't look like you were passing it through.
And that's exactly where we're going, right? So when you're doing this on your own, it's great to pair program. And I want you to encourage and help each other, 20-minute rule, all that. But before you get there, do exactly what we're going to do. We've centered this problem to the fact that it's not defined. So you bring up a great point that, well, what's passing it? Let's take a look. So our toggle edit, right, is not defined through the table, which would be here. Is it? Well, it seems, well, let's just follow the train. Okay, so let's see. Toggle edit, it's defined. Good. Okay, that looks good. Let's look at our method here. On the table, there it is, right? So if you get to a point where you say, oh, okay, right around here, this on click isn't working. My other props were going through. Let's backtrace, and there you go. So instead of combing around, getting lost, and panicking, which I've done all three, you've now methodically isolated and traced the problem. So let's put that on. All right. Okay, and remember, for those of you that this gets overwhelming, and me included, it's okay to move. Take your time. Tracing it this way now will save hours later. And as you move faster and faster, you get better and better with more practice. That's of course good. So don't always second guess yourself. Don't even trust yourself. That's the way I look at it. So let's save that over. And now what I like to do is let's pull an F5 up. Let's just do a C-log on it and see what happens. Because I want to make sure that my state changes, right? Because that's the key here, is when that toggles, my is editing should change. So let's go right up here. And we're going to have to go, all right, this is the best place to go when you have a class component to see if something's getting passed out. It's not in here because of the constructor and then the method definitions, is to go right here if you want to console log it, right before the return of the render. And let's just take a look at this .state is editing, right? Because this is what's going to change based on our click. So what we're going to do, pull up my thing, it's false, right? So when I click this, it should go true. Uh-oh. What other issue might, oh wait, this might not even be in, this, hold on. That's not the right browser maybe, let's try it again. Because, yeah, see, I have so many browsers open and it's specific when you use the Chrome DevTools, it's gonna pop one up when you spawn it. So here we go, let's try that again. Uh-oh. What's happening here? Can I check this yet? I should, right? Because I should be triggering a state change. What's going on? So is editing, that looks good. We're passing it down. Is that the right thing to log there? This .state is editing? Okay. Did I pass it down correctly? Okay, let's see. Wait a minute. Look at that. I need to go through the table. Easy mistake, but something that will cost you and cause fret because you're like, what now? So even when you're doing these, they're very hard to keep track of. But notice how I knew my problem was localized. I had to be with how I was either calling state or passing it immediately. And it just happened to be that I added on the wrong thing. So this better work, or I'm having router issues and the wind is blowing hard, so I might disconnect. Oh, thank God. Look at that. Working just fine. Right? So we may be moving a bit turtle-ish at the moment, but I want to, because we don't get time often to look at the debugger tools, talk about how they work, and we need to at times. And there's not enough time in the day, but this is the time. And when you approach this stuff, I want you to think about, it's not you or a fault in you, it's us trying to speak to the computer. And now you have tools to check even when console.log isn't enough. Use them all. So now we're ready to rock and roll. I can say, okay, if I click this button, I want to use my handle edit. So where should I tell that? And the question is, where does that happen? And it's here, right? If I'm collecting this data, right, and I go to submit it, how can I indicate that that data that's going in is to be passed via edit? So what I would suggest is, let's just go down and look at all the pieces that are involved with this, and then we can handle the UI too along the way as we see fit. So when we toggle the edit, right, our table now sends that message, and we can now access that on state. So when we submit the form, right, we could kind of take a look at where that is, because maybe when we submit it, we can say, hey, instead of props.handleSubmit, if we're editing, run props.handleEdit, right? And then if that's the case, then we can finish our logic up on the main app. So let's pass that down, right? So for our form, we're going to have to tell our form that we need access to handle edit. And also is editing. And let's destructure that, since I think I already have it set up on state. Let's give it a save. Okay, so technically we should double check. So when we go into props, let's make sure we're passing that down. So right here below the return, above the return, I'm going to just console.log props. And let's say these are my props on, what is this called? Table body form. All right, and we're going to just do a quick props check. Okay, and all right, props on form, what are you? Oh, look, it starts out one way, and then I guess it loads up on component and mount. Let's see what I got available. I got handle edit, boom. I got is editing false, wonderful. Let me just test something. Oh, did we re-render? Yes, we did. So state change induced a props change, which caused re-rendering of that entire segment of the DOM tree, of the virtual DOM, that branch, essentially. So that's good. Looks like we got what we want. So now let's do the logic, right? Because now, if I make a boo-boo in the logic, I know it's not in my passing of the, I know it's not in that. So I can be localized. So up here, let's do a little bit of rendering here. What can I do? Would this work? On submit, if I am editing, so as I like to say, is editing, right, the ternary. So is editing, meaning are you editing? And if the answer is yes, I want to handle the edit. And if the answer is no, I want to handle the submit. And then we get into JS craziness. What is my problem here? Well, it might not be the JSX, more so than this is a props. You can destructure, but for now we'll leave it just like that. So this tells me that when I'm editing, if I am, and it's true, I want you to execute handle edit with the inputs. And if it's false, I want you to just do a handle submit. Let's save it. And let us check with our crops here if we also trigger, or well, we know we trigger it as editing, we check that. So now we could go and move up and employ the logic, right? Because we know it's passed down, right? And if we throw an issue, we'll check here if we have something spelled wrong, but we're pretty much golden to come up on this application and write the logic. So let's give it a shot. Let's handle the edit. And, oh, all right, so do I need something more here? How am I gonna know which one I'm editing? Well, there's an ID. I wonder what I did to pass them in for submitting, right? And this is where the beauty of components comes in. So let's take a look down back on that table body, right? And see, oh, okay, so I didn't do it there, did I? Handle delete, no, this must be on the form, right? So even as you search around, oh, okay, so here's my input submit, right? So this is when I click submit, we'll fire this off. All right, so that's fine. Let's drill down another level, take a look at my inputs. And, oh, all right, so I'm collecting the value on name change. And when I do, this pairs up with a function up on state. But that isn't gonna do anything for me. So the question now becomes is, how do I target this button? Well, I'm not looking for the submit, right? I'm looking for the edit. So every time I click this button, I want to know, is there some way that I can track it? And here we have kind of the issue of connection again, but this one's easier because guess what? When we collect this target, right, we can filter that up and pass that information as a parameter into toggle edit. We don't have to, we're connected, we could just pass it in. So the question becomes is, what is going on here that I can use? So let's just do a check here, because every time we do buttons and targeted events, right, you know that some sort of e.target is coming into play. So let's just see what's on this object and see what we're dealing with. So here we have an object. Did I not do that right? Da, da, da. Oh, I guess I got to trigger it, right? So don't forget when you're doing stuff like this to trigger the event. Oh, killed it, right? So console.log is not a, well, console isn't. So we'll stick to that. Trigger that edit, and let's see what's on it. All right, so moving down. Got a whole bunch of crap. Anything that's, uh-oh, not looking good here, right? So let's check the target, null. So this might not work, right? So how else might I be able to track this? Well, take a look at what we're doing here. We're mapping, right? So when I map over these, I'm giving each character a name, a job, 2 buttons, and a key. The key is using the UUID v4, right? So we can even keep this separately. And what can I do here so that when I make this button, I can tie it to a specific user? And you could do a couple things. We can make a new category of just ID, like I did here, right? And keep it separate from the key. Just I'm not sure. I don't think you could use the key. I mean, you probably could, but I mean, I would just leave the key do its thing by itself with something that is definitely different each time it renders, so, and unique to it. But this character ID here that I'm passing in, where's that coming from? So let me take a look where that pops into play, right? And it looks like somewhere along the, oh, look at this. I'm using an ID that I pass through on state and using it to connect down on my table. So, it's available on props, right? So here, how can I use this so now that I know I'm in line with my character? Well, let's try the same strategy. Let's go ahead and try our, what was this, props.what? Handle it, toggle edit, I think. Well, what did I pass? Let's see, I'm getting tired. It's almost 11 o'clock. But let's see, because this is something that very viable happens to everybody. You're coding for 17 hours straight now, you take a break. But luckily, I have this magic little thing called, what did I have here? Okay, I'm good. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's pass it the ID that I set with it. And in this case, this would be passed down with props. So let's try passing in character ID. Let's do a save quick. And let's see, clear my console. Let's do another reloop here just to get a fresh look. And let's give it a try. We'll click a button. Boom. Let's see what comes down on props. All right. So we might have to do something a little extra for the ID. It doesn't look like, oh, collecting the data. All right, so that's interesting. Let me do a refresh. Oh, all right, so now that's a little different behavior, right? It's not submitting it when I edit it. So let's check submit. Oh, okay, so I'm gonna submit. My edit is triggering a different function, reloading the page. So that's a good sign. The question now becomes, what am I doing? And it appears that I'm not doing anything yet. So if I prevent the default, and if this function's wired up properly, we should have, I should probably pass in E, right? We should see, hopefully, when I do an edit, the page not reload. So I'll do a submit to check. Oh, my function is wired up. So here's another way to debug. Use observations like that to help you. If I change one thing and I expect it to do this behavior and it does the behavior, that's a good sign that we're right where we need to be. So now let's work out this logic and try it. So what do I do when I edit a task? So the way I think about this is when I edit out a task, I'm going to want a copy of the original, right? So I'm going to want to copy the original array. And I want to do so up into essentially the point of where my item is going to be edited, right? So I want to work up to the original edit, or the array, the ID, right? Which means I'm probably going to have to pass this in too, like I was. So that's why I passed it in down there. I got to bring it in up here. And that ID should identify for me the object that I want to work with. But in an array, I'm going to need to tie this into the index. So I'm going to have to work up to the ID to identify the object, to ID the object, but then I'm going to have to find some method that I can use to relate the position of that object or find the index of that object. And then what I can do is, oh, I hate when it does that. Why is it doing that? What I can do is I could copy my array, copy array to the index with some method, insert new updates, and copy the rest. So it's very similar to how I handle my delete logic, wherever I did that. Oh, here, well, you could do your delete logic very similarly, where you will cut up to the point and then cut after, copy after it, but not include it, so it deletes it. But this time I decided to do a good old filter. So many ways to do the same thing, but for this, what I like to do, like one thing I like to do, and there are a couple different ways to do this. This you'll see it in Redux too, is a really good way to approach it. Is what I'll do is I'll pull in my array, right? So I have essentially my characters. So we'll say constant, and I'll destructure here, characters is equal to this dot state. And what I'll do is I will essentially want to find the object now, work up to the ID and find it. And I'll do that by saying, okay, well, my index, and I'm going to spell it out just so we don't get it confused with ID, is going to be equal to, right, my characters somewhere. I'm going to map over them. Or not map, excuse me, I'm going to find index over them. There are two methods that I really, really love, find and find index. Find will return the object, the first object that matches the conditional itself, and find index will return its index. If it isn't present, I'm pretty sure the find index returns -1, which means it's not present, and then find will, I think, return false, because it returns true with the first, I think, or, but either way, you could test those out. But if for indexing methods, if you get a -1, that usually indicates it's not present. So we're going to find that index, and we're going to map over all the characters one by one, each character. And I want to make sure that when I find my character, which has the ID that's coming up, right? I want to find that index, right? So when I find the index of the character ID that matches, in this case, my ID. So I'm saying, okay, get me the object in which the ID from below that I'm passing in matches the ID I have on state. And when it does, throw out the index. And let's check it. So we'll do a console.log. We'll do the index just to see. We'll save it. We'll click on a button. Let me label this and clear this. So we'll say that, hit save, hit edit. True, that's great. Props object. Did I not? Oh, I have to submit it. That's a poor place to do it, but let me give it a shot. So we hit edit. Boom, boom. Ooh, still not there yet. We're close. But let's see, did it log me an index somewhere? Maybe not. So let's hold on to that for a minute, but it should. Let me clear it one more time and try it. If not, then I'll set a breakpoint and give it a shot, but well, we'll come back to that. That's a little, sometimes you get stuff you don't expect, but let me just set a breakpoint because now I'm really curious to see what's going on. Okay, so handle the edit. Let's step over. Let's not do that. Let's refresh it. And then it gets, sometimes it'll like lag a little bit, but of course, when you're debugging and you just want to always something holding you up, it's like being caught in traffic and you're like 4 hours late. Okay, so back here, that's great. Play. Yeah, so I don't think I'm breaking at that point. So we'll give it a shot and we'll execute it and see what the issue is with that for now. Yeah, here's another thing too. With something like that, if you're not sure, go a little bit more and don't let that hold you up. So I'm just gonna check to make sure find index is right. I'm taking a character, my character ID is good. Let me just, this.state.characters. Okay, just checking all that. And for funsies, let me do this. Oh, now it won't be available, that's stupid, sorry. Okay, so let's just, I was gonna say, did it come out now? Okay, so let's just continue on for now, and it's probably something that I'm overlooking, really simple, but we've all been there. So let's go ahead and continue this. So then basically what I wanna do is when I have this index, I want to set my state, and I'm going to do so by first taking my characters array, and I'm going to make a shallow copy, and I'm going to do that with the slice function. So I'm going to say, okay, if I take my characters and I slice them from the beginning to the index, and I spread those out so that I don't get an array in an array, I then am going to save a spot for an object that I'm going to provide the updated object with. And I'm going to finalize by saying anything after that object with that ID is going to be sliced and it's going to be sliced from the index to the end. And if you don't pass a second parameter in, and the number, it will slice to the end by default. And I'm going to spread that out. And now I just need to figure out what I'm putting in here. So when my user submits something, right, where are those values? Well, let's see. When I do the editing, they should be up here on state because we connected them. So what I want to do is I want to pass in the updated values for those. So in this case, it would be name, and if it's present, job. And I'll destructure them as well. Hit save, and let's see what happens. So we'll check our add. Still working. We'll check our edit. Ooh, okay, that's interesting, right? So now something's a little miss here. Let's check to make sure that oh, you got a slice +1. You got to go one past the index you're going up to. I just wasn't slicing past. So basically from 0 to index, and then to index is putting it back on the end. So I had to slice it out. So let's slice +1. Whoops. And let's see here. Boom. Edit. Ooh, now I really messed something up. Okay, so now I'm grabbing for straws. But look at what I'm doing. What did I do there? I ended up just like copying the whole list down. So what's up? I have my array of my characters. I'm setting it up to 0 to the index, which should go up to my index. I'm setting my name and job. And is that index +1? Yeah. So what might be going on? And how, somebody suggests how to debug it. Okay, I've been talking, think about it. What can we do? Because here's another issue. And if we don't know what the answer is, what could I do based on our lecture discussion tonight to find it? Where should I go next? Let's see. What do you think? What could be? So it's definitely picking up what I'm typing in, right? It has to be in the way I'm doing this logic. So when I do the index, right, that's going to cut out from the index, but that's going to include now my one I want to edit. So that's why we saw me putting in my value that I put in when I did this, right? So let's see the behavior again. When I do this here, I hit edit. I should get something like that, right? So if I copy the whole thing, my entry is going in, and then I'm putting back the original thing I tried to slice out to begin with. So this part is that's fine. So now when I do +1, which I thought, okay, so if I slice up to the index and then get that out, and then I started at the index +1, the one right after it, and save it. Let's see what that behavior is. Okay, submit, and then let's do it first up here. All right, so it put on my thing. That's interesting, right? So that this this is a little weird. It put on my my item, and then my edit, it like flipped it. So this is kind of interesting. Wow, but you can see a parallel here. So I'm copying the whole thing and then somewhere flipping. So that might be something. That's actually really, really odd. I want to see that again if you don't mind. This is the kind of stuff that I like live for, because it's like only during after hours would this happen. And project build week presentation. So let's try this again. And we're just gonna, we'll edit something right off the bat. Now, if I want to check transposition and use all the same letters. So let's do something really obvious. All right, so now when I did the edit on the last one, okay, so what's the issue here?
I think I might have figured it out, Ryan.
Okay, what do you think it is based off the behavior you're seeing from this edition?
From the behavior I'm seeing, it looks like you're spreading in on line 77, where you're spreading in character slice index +1. It looks like it's grabbing everything up to that index before it as well, instead of just after it. So maybe we should double check what slice actually returns when only one value is passed in.
Right, and so it's not we're definitely returning the name and the job, right? It's either going back to either the slice or the index originally, although when we do it looks like explainable when we do that, right? Because we get it inserts right after we put in the other one. So we absolutely need to check that. For funsies, right? What would that do? I love this because this takes me back to like my chemistry days. Using those two observations and predicting a pattern, what should this do? And you can make your guesses, but the best way is to do it. And let's see, and then we're gonna check those values because, oh, all right, so I hit edit. What did that do? And now it's like, there's some interesting pattern going on here. Now it pulled Cletus and Adam and put them in. Well, actually, it put Adam in and moved Cletus down. So now with the -1, that makes sense. The +1 makes sense. Or the index makes sense, but not the +1. So let's check it. And the best now what we can do for that is let's just do this. And I guess we can do a console.log. And where probably the best place to do that is I wonder if I could squeeze one in right below this .state. And what do we want to do? Checking that slice. I guess what I can do is just this, kind of in a way. Let's pull this out and set it as a variable. So constant left slice is equal to, and we'll do, in this case, let's just see, I'll just do the whole thing. We'll just slice it all out. Instead of making like 20 variables and sticking them in, and then we'll just do that. And let's just go ahead and say, okay, we're gonna characters dot slice it from 0 to index. Wait a minute. No, that never mind. Okay, so we'll check what that is, and then we're gonna put in our name and job, and then we're going to slice characters from index, and we'll start with +1, and let us log that. And we probably can just log that right above set state then. And where's that props on form? Okay, see, this is why labeling is good too, because I want to get rid of that. That's driving me nuts. So props on form, let's bust that. Nice clean console. And all right, here goes nothing. Like Christmas morning, it's either going to be a Nintendo or a lump of coal. Let's see what we got. So another one of my one-liners. Let's go ahead and try this here. It's an array. That's what I wanted. All right, so what does that tell us? So when I slice it, I had an array of 7. I have an array of 8 now, I guess, a length of 8, but not much, right? So let's, this ID though is pretty useful. Let's check that. So my ID coming through, okay, cool. That looks pretty good, right? 5 on 5. I'll go for that. So the ID looks pretty cool. Oh, wait a minute. Let's check the index. Now we'll be able to. Let's do a console.log of the index. Oh, this would explain the interesting behavior now. It's not found. Well, why? Now this is, so when it's not found, this is deep, like, because what's not found? Let's see if it checks to see, like that would explain what's going on here a little bit, but let's try it at the end and do those edge cases we were doing. Because why does it seem to make sense when we do it in certain places, but not in others? So let's try another case again. Because now we'll add one. That looks good. Let's edit one in the middle. Now it looks like it's doing it all the time. So my question is why is this index undefined? Well, let's make sure we're mapping over everything correctly. Something looks wrong about this. Characters, that's find index. Interesting. Let's change it to find and see if it finds something. And then that'll tell us that it's probably in the way I'm defining this here. So let's take a look. Edit that. All right, so, So whatever I'm searching for, I'm not finding, which means that either this character ID is bogus, or this ID that I'm passing in is a little out of whack here. So wait a minute. Guess what? The character.id is a UUID v4. I believe. Or let's take a look, because this is where, do you notice how I kind of like I didn't address this, and you were probably all thinking it, like, where is the ID coming from? It seems to work here because they delete, right? So, but my question is, where is that coming from? We think it's on props, right? So this is where we console.log props. Then maybe props.id. Wait, props.id or props.character ID, right? So let's go back to the props and let's just check, right? So coming in, here's the characters. Oh, crud. So my character ID is mapping out of here, right? And I'm taking that ID up and trying to match it on each character. Well, that looks pretty good. So what might the issue be? I'd say destructuring, but that seemed to work. But just in case, let's go back to the root and take it out. I mean, I'm passing in my ID, which is what I'm representing here. What is that ID that I'm passing up? Well, it should be my character ID. And my character ID, I'm hoping, is matching. Oh. Is that really what I want? That match? Am I matching the same thing? Or am I matching, is that what I should be using? And the funny thing is it seemed to work here for the delete thing, right? So what might we suggest? Let me go back to something a little less messy here. The issue now has been localized to right around here. It's something with, this is fine. This seems to give us what we want most of the time. I think the one time it reversed, but it's functioning. We saw that, and it has to be somewhere right in there. We've logged the index. It doesn't exist. We've tried to find. It's not finding. It must be something in this conditional. Any thoughts? Because now I'm like, we might have to run in panic, but this is one of those moments where I go downstairs for like a cup of coffee and like it comes to me in a vision because I don't look at it. But this is a time too, if that you see it, please speak up, because I've been looking at this code for too long, and I mean, I have ID spelled right? Like that. I mean, and it's coming in. We checked all that. It all looks good.
Did your console log ID being passed in on 66?
No, so maybe we should. What is that? Undefined? So now where'd that come? Okay, so we have an issue here. What is going on? So here now we're starting to track this. So now the ID isn't coming in correctly. So let's compare it to something else. What is correct about it here? My handle at it? Am I handling that on the table, or am I handling that on the form, or should I just try this? Just here's what we call, this is the good old third grade guess and check method. Just to see. Let's see what that does. Just for funsies. That's my phrase for the night. Like, okay. All right, so what is it then about the delete function that is using this that seems to work, but now getting passed in this way isn't?
Do you need to explicitly pass in the event where the function actually fires? Because you pass in E and ID there to the handle edit function, but you only pass one parameter in.
Okay, so there's two rationales for this. One, on the delete, we don't need it, the prevent default. And two, you're probably right, is the other response to that. So let's check it. And could that have been wording that? I mean, that's the next line down, right? You would never even imagine it, but it could viably be thwarting us. Oh, but now, oh wait, okay. So let's dial it back a little bit, and let's take a look here. Let's try this. First of all, I'm gonna try to put it on this, and this is gonna be. No, this is gonna get messy actually, because I could pass that in and put the prevent there, but now that's gonna get messy. But when I'm down here, I'm just gonna do this. I'm thinking about it. Put my brain somewhere else, and maybe this distraction is going to cause me to come up with the answer. So when you're lost, when you're looking for something you can't find, you look for something else. And you're going to do something else. So let me do this and then get a fresh mind. All right, so that works. Oh, wait a minute. Toggling. Okay, so that's fine. We expect that. Okay, so we're still in that localized area, but it doesn't seem to be the prevent default. So I'm going to put that back on just to be safe. Let me make sure that that's all good. Passing down. It's good. Props. Yep. Handle edit. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Props. On job change. Let me get all this out of here. And let me just put the props on quick because I have a little bit of like, it's probably not anything to do with it, but just for the sake of clarity at this point. Grade check. So still the same issue, so let's go back up on the app. And toggle.edit is fine. When we hit edit, that's fine. Let's prevent the default again. And check it one more time. And I know it's getting past time, so I may have you do some homework, which I'll probably get right off here and be like, oh, okay, that's how I roll. Hit edit.
I think you just might need to make sure you're passing event into the click handler where it's invoked as well.
Okay, good. A good error. Oh, okay, there we go. And another error. Oh, preb default. Okay, so now we're getting tired. So you're right. So let's double check that. Thank you, Adam. So let's prevent the default, not prev it. And we'll check down on our input form. And where were we with the handle change? Right here. Ah, okay. So where do I pass in those IDs? When I click the button, right? So I'm passing an ID in to a function that's an on click, I think, right? So so let's take a look. So on my on clicker, I go to the table body, right? Okay, so when I toggle the edit, my toggle.edit doesn't care about my ID. Good call, right? And this is how things go. This is how it goes, right? Like it just made sense to me for a moment to be like, oh, wait a minute. Why did I feel like it should have been there? Because that's where the button was. But the question is where am I collecting that data for the logic? And let me just clean this up quick. Good call. So now I probably have something out of whack here. Yeah, I know. I have to close my tag. Okay. So now the question is where does this ID go in? And my functions are here. Oh, so now how do I connect the two is the question.
You might be able to pass an event and ID to the click handler.
Okay, good idea. So down on the click handler, which should be here. So now
So if
I'm
you
going to
have
pull the event from here.
on this function being passed in, but you specify event as being passed into that function,
Yep.
gives you access to the event.
And then we're going to go over and take care of the ID, right? So when I pass in the event, let me pass it in properly quick. Okay. Then, oh, wait a minute. When I do my ID, right, that ID should come up and toggle at it, right? Should I put it here, or if I'm passing it into, because here it's going to pass into toggle edit, right? So what might I do here as well? Well, let's pass in with it. Now, the double pass in might be a little tricky here. So how about we do this? We have an ID, right? Let's go back to what I was doing, which was our character ID, right? But let's go back and investigate that toggle edit function. All right, so when this fires, when I click it, why don't we go back to the app and do this? Now, that should give me, when I click, hopefully, and this console.log, I got to change it, so let's console.log down here. Actually, it's on state, so I can just do it really anywhere inside that. So let's do console.log state, this.state. And all right, so now let me label this again and click and see what we got. Oh, not gonna work, right? So the current ID still undefined. So my genius idea didn't work, but let's think about this. When I toggle it, I changed the state, but there is no current ID at the time. Hence that. So where are we dropping this? And this is, here we go with this loop again. How can we handle both? Well, let's think about where we do these things. So the e.target, we handle right here for the edit. For the button, we don't need it because we have an ID that we could pair with it. So the question is let's take a look at that because we have two places we have to work with. We have the button itself, which toggles the edit, but in that part, we have the ability to set an ID with it. So here it works because we handle the delete. The question now is, how do we pass this back up? And I think we have one of these issues again, where now we're rendering something out down here. So how can we get it to connect to state? And that is the big question because I am very tired, but I'm going to take a minute. It is about 10 after, and here's what we're going to do. I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say I did this to model good behavior. I need to take a minute. You all need to take a minute or the night. I'm going to get myself something to eat, and in about 20 minutes, I'm going to come back and I'm going to look at this again. and we're going to have it solved either by somebody in the meantime or by the time I get back, because it's something, at least we know though what it's dealing with and what the issue is. We have it boiled down to an ID that is not being passed because it's not getting passed to the right function at the moment. So the question then becomes, how do we get it there? Okay? I hope this was helpful. We were responding to what you guys were talking about on Hull, and I apologize that I didn't get to some router tonight. So I would gladly, and I'll check if this is okay, and I would love to do this. If anybody wanted to, throughout the week, if we have some, it's a week where we have a lot of time usually, if you want to get together for an hour and just do some programming or some with some router, I would gladly. And I know the PMs are awesome, everyone. So use your resources, use your PMs, ask me, ask each other, and definitely take advantage of one of the few weeks where it's a light week at Lambda. And we can go and look at that stuff. I will gladly, trust me. I could do this all day, except for about 20 minutes of it, where I need to take a break. So I won't keep you any longer, but that's going to be my course of action. So I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to refresh, and I'm going to come back at this, and I'm going to remap it out quick and handle the edit. Okay? Any questions? By all means, always let any one of us know. And again, another fun after hours. I love these, and thank you for coming out, and let us know if you need anything in the meantime. Thank you.